Amen. All right, so we're into session 13. As normal, we're going to start our review of Hebrew verbs. I realize it's sort of redundant and over again, but that's the best form of learning. And because we're not really doing a grammar class, I'm not forcing you. I'm not requiring that you spend an enormous amount of time studying the Hebrew, although I certainly value added in doing so. But as we talked before, the Hebrew root, the Hebrew verb is built around the root, just like the noun is built around the root. When you add the vowels, it typically becomes a stem. With the verbs form, there may also be a prefix that's added as part of the stem. And then you have what's added in addition to that, of course, is the vowel pattern, and the prefixes are typically are going to form the conjugation. Conjugation, yeah. I keep wanting to say congregation and other things. So, and as we saw in our video let's go to the PowerPoint. That's a good idea. Would you do me a favor, Arnold? If you remember the Zoom, just move to, not Zoom on the vMix, just move the arrow to merge. Thank you. I just saw me on the screen. I said, oh, that's not right. Nobody wants to look at that. Thank you. Arnold is the master vMix man. Okay, so we mentioned the root, the stem, and the conjugation. We saw the video a while back where it depicted a couple of ways to look at it. The root, the shurish, the Hebrew word for root, basically is the foundation for all words. You can have a triconsonantal root, whereas where our focus has been, because that's the most common. Also biconsonantal. Of course, the root is made of consonants, so that's why we say triconsonantal, biconsonantal, quadconsonantal, and some other forms. And built from the root is called the stem, or in some grammars, it's more the binyan, or binyanim, being the plural, so it would be binyanim. But the stem is the typical grammar. The more modern grammars would refer to it that way. And then added to that, when you modify it in various forms, so you get the conjugation, which basically tells us about how it functions in the sentence, whether it be an active or passive or reflective, or if its voice is active, passive, or reflective, or if it's a simple action, the type of action, simple action, or intensive action, or causative action. And of course, I always like this chart because it just gives you that big picture. And to me, it's better to start with the big picture as you're sort of trying to dive down into a little deeper, because you always want to remember where you are in relationship to the whole picture. And so we see the root at the top there. The root doesn't carry a meaning specifically. It carries the concept, or it carries a meaning, but not in terms of being used in a word. Because if you notice, when you see a root and it forms its various words, they can have different meanings. Various meanings come from that root. But you see sort of basic or foundational meaning that's formed in the root. And then in the kal stem, called the kal or the pa'al, the more ancient grammar is called the pa'al. More recent are the kal, which would be the simple stem. It's and from the kal stem are the other stems of the other binyanim. The nifal, the piel, the pual, the hifel, the hofal, and the hitpael. We've already looked at the nifal and with the kal and the nifal. Tonight we'll look at the piel and the pual, and we focus on the perfect. And we have the conjugations. There are really 8. The cordative and the GSOP are sort of the formation of some of the others. They're pretty well. We're going to focus on just the first 2 because the idea is for you to get an understanding, a feel for it, and not necessarily know every nuance or aspect of it, but get a feel for it so that you could step further into your study without too great of a difficulty. And so as we move forward, we talked about how the root itself, R1, R2, R3, we were going right to left. R1 is the root position 1, R2, root position 2, R3, root position 3. If this uses right now we have in there just as an example, the consonants pei, ayin, and lamed. The pei, ayin, and lamed are would be the root for the pa'al, which is this which is what most of the grammatical examples are built from. But the significance here is, of course, just like in a noun, you can have prefixes, you can have suffixes, and you can have infixes with the vowel patterns. And so by depending upon the vowel pattern or the stem that's added, you can add a prefix to form a certain stem, to form a certain conjugation, whether it be perfect, imperfect, cohortative, adjussive, imperative, infinitive, absolute, construct, infinitive, these kind of things. But you also have, and especially just like nouns, you have number, gender, and person. We have number and gender and person, I think. I'd have to go back and look. I get confused. But in the verb, we have number, gender, and person. These are added to as a suffix, and they give us specifically who's being referred to in the context, whether it be third person masculine singular, or third person masculine plural, or feminine, or common, first person common, second person, these kind of things. And so we see that the verbal root contains the basic meaning, the semantic information, and it sort of helps you to recognize how words are formed from that root, and they generally carry that same basic meaning. For example, this is the mem lamed kaf. This is the final kaf there for melech, and melech is the noun for king, if we see at the bottom left, excuse me, and then malka for queen. We'll notice that we basically add the comates hey at the end, and that makes it, oftentimes that will show you it's feminine in nature, in its grammatical form, and here that will then refer to a queen and not the king. And so malkut is kingdom, but you see the verb, and here's where the pattern really stands. Well, you see the pattern both in the nouns and in the verb. Specifically, malak is the verb to reign, the king reign. So that would be with the comates under the mem and the padak under the lamed, and then the final kaf. And that's the pattern, that comates padak pattern for the vowels is the pattern for the call stem. And so we said that the stem basically embeds in it two things, predominantly the verbal voice, that is active, passive, or reflective, and the verbal type of action, that is going to be the simple, intensive, and causative type of action. There are 7 basic verbal stems. There are more, but they're not predominantly used, and they're basically built from these anyway. So all grammars that I know of just focus on these 7. We're going to focus on just 2, or the first 5. The call, the nifal, those are both simple. Well, let me show you that in a minute. So the call, the nifal, the pl, the pual, the hipel. We won't do the hopal or the hipael, and I'll show you kind of why in a minute. And you see the Hebrew spelling for those words. And that's why I put the, for the call, also put the pa'al, because if you look at the spelling for the call, the pa'al, with the comates and the padak under the first 2, root 1 and root 2, you see that how that pattern changes using the pa'al all the way through. And that's why I kind of like to see that, because now you can see the pattern flow from the pa'al all the way through to the hipael, and because they're using the same root in your grammars, in the learning process. And then, of course, we talked about the active voice, the passive voice, the reflective voice. Notice that the active voice is call, pl, hipael. Passive, of course, is nifal, also reflective, puel and hopal. And reflective, this can be nifal and hipael. Let me show you the next slide. That's what I want to talk to. So we started with the call week before last and nifal last week, predominantly because they're both simple action. They're both a simple action, and one's active voice and one's passive voice. That's why we want to build from there. Notice we're always going to build from the call stem, and then we're going to add, modify it to get the whatever stem is next. It's, in my mind anyway, it's simple to stay in the simple action with the active voice, then the simple action with the passive voice, and you see the change. And so tonight we're going to look at the intensive action with the PL active voice and the passive voice. So both are intensive action. Next week, we'll look at the causative action and the hip-IL. I may go ahead and throw in and I probably will because it's not that difficult, causative action for the passive voice, the hip-IL. And the only thing we will not have really spent is the reflective one, the hip-IL, but that's okay. Well, 6 out of 7 is pretty good, I think, for this class. So you will be Hebrew intermediate experts. You become experts after you do the hip-IL. And so when we look at, for example, the call, the simple action, active voice, there the Hebrew word is shama, he heard. And now these can be past, present, or future. Hebrew verbs are not predominantly focused on time. It's not that time doesn't exist, but time is built around the context more so than the Hebrew verb. In the Greek, remember that time was a significant aspect, at least for the indicative mood. Remember, we had different moods. Indicative and subjunctive is what we emphasize. In the indicative mood, time was more of an emphasis, both the time and the type of action. When you get out of the indicative mood, time carries less weight in the Greek. Well, in Hebrew, time doesn't carry much weight in the word, but the context drives that time. It's not that time doesn't exist in the Hebrew thought. People who want to talk about how time is almost non-existent in Hebrew thought is really inaccurate. Although certainly time exists. The day and eternity, these kind of things. However, it wasn't a predominant. The writings don't indicate it was a predominant perspective in their thought process, in their philosophy and theology and such. But that's a different topic. So as we look at, so we have the simple action active voice with shama, he heard, and put in the passive would be now the nifal stem. That's all you've done. You've now used a different stem to show it's functioning passively. And so it's the nishma, he was heard. Again, whether it be past, present, or future. And now tonight we'll do the intensive action, both the active voice and passive voice. There's the PL and the PUL. The PL, notice that we just changed the vowels. Well, we got a different word, but notice the vowel formation. The key thing is that you see you have the heric underneath the root one, and you're going to have I always get the Segol and Serre mixed up. This is the Serre, and the Serre under root 2, along with the Dagesh Forte in this root 2, the little dot in the center in root 2 position. Those are the keys to recognize that pattern, and that's PL. You notice you got the vowel, the IE, or the sound, IEL, or IE sound, the vowel sound. So it's the PL would be shimer. And then the PUL, there you have the shurik under the root 1 position, the shu, shuve. You see that's a potic. So that's shubar. And so you go from the active voice of intensive action as shiber, he smashed into pieces, to the passive shubar, it was smashed into pieces. Or he was smashed into pieces, either way. And then we'll look at that's tonight, and then next week we'll look at the causative active and causative passive, hip-IL, hope-IL, where basically we're going to add the stem, and now we're dealing with Melech, the king, in the word here. And so it's him-lik, he made someone king, so it's causative. He caused someone to be, he crowned someone. That would be causative. And then the hope-IL, the passive voice of that, hamlak, as he was made king. And so that person was made or was crowned. So it's he crowned someone or he was crowned. So you have the active action versus the passive action. And then the last one, intensive reflective voice, hip-IL. This is Hithchabe. He hit himself. Okay, so that was fun. And then we go to look at the conjugations. There are actually, let's see, there are two more than, yeah, there's two more than this. There's 8 total. The 2 of them are not shown here, the cohortative and GSOP. The perfect and imperfects, where we spend our time. Imperative, infinitive construct, and infinitive absolute participle is certainly very important, but the predominant usage in the Old Testament is going to be imperative, perfect, and imperfect. Now, the conjugation is really telling us whether type of action, whether it's completed action, perfect, or incomplete action, which would be imperfect. The completed action is going to be something, an action that's completed, whether it's completed in the past, completed in the present, completed in the future. And so typically it gets translated in a past tense because it's completed. The incompleted action is going to be something that's ongoing or iterative or continuing in some form, and whether it be past, present, or future. And so generally speaking, we would make it something that is not an ED, he said would be a completed action. But he says would be a incomplete action. It's ongoing type of thing. The imperative, we're used to imperative. It's more of a command demanding immediate action. Infinitive construct is a function like our English infinitive. That's where you have the two, to learn, to study, to go, to do. Those are infinitives. And the construct, of course, is the absolute. We did look a little bit at the absolute and the noun and the construct for the noun. So remember, the only difference really, now the construct sometimes may change in spelling. We didn't go a lot into that. No, we're talking about nouns now, okay? But generally we know that the construct and absolute are going to be side by side. Could be a series of them, a chain of them. The last word will be absolute, the rest in the chain. It's called a construct chain. Will all be referring to the absolute one, and so that's how we get the genitive or the possessive, of the king or of the king's home or whatever. They just put the words side by side. One's in the construct state, one's in the absolute state. Now, verbs have construct in absolute state as well, in the infinitive, to be. So it's very similar. Participles, we didn't really do much participles in the Greek, nor did we do infinitives either. Infinitives are verbal adverbs. Wait a minute, no, verbal noun, excuse me. Yeah, let me get this right. See, participle is a verbal adjective. Infinitives are verbal adverbs. Verbal nouns, excuse me, that's it. Infinitives are verbal nouns, nouns that, it's a verb that has a noun function to it. Verbal adjective would be a verb that has an adjectival function to it. We touched on it. We talked about it in the Greek, but it's also in the Hebrew. It's also in English. This is nothing new if you have some familiarity with English grammar. Same kind of stuff. And then, of course, we mentioned, we have not gone, nor we're going to go into weak verbs. We talked about strong verbs. Strong verbs is where the consonants are considered strong. There are certain consonants, such as the gutturals, the I and the aleph, sometimes the resh, what are the gutturals? I'm going blank. I and aleph, hey and het. Those are gutturals, and they don't take a doggish anything. Doggish lene, doggish forte, doggish lene. Softens or hardens the sound. If it's got a lene, a doggish lene, then it's a hard sound. If it doesn't have a doggish lene, it's a soft sound. Gutturals don't take it. Doggish forte doubles the consonant sound, Instead of writing it twice, you just put the dot in there. Now you speak it, you double it. Well, gutturals don't take that. They're also called weak. Other weak consonants are the hey. Hey is always a weak. If somebody says hey to you, man, they're just weak. Yeah, there's my joke for the day. You worked long and hard like I did today, then those best you can do. The yod is a weak consonant. It's weak in the sense that they have a tendency to be replaced by other stronger consonants. It's weak that they tend to fall off. It's weak that they don't always stay where they're supposed to be. And so you get a lot of variation in those weak consonants as the word, when you add something to the root, to the stem, or to the prefix or the suffix, that oftentimes those weak consonants fall off, or they get changed, or something of these natures. And so they're called weak. They're just kind of weakly. The strong ones, they don't care what you do to the prefix and the suffix. They're staying right where they are. So they're called strong. That's really the basis of it. And so you also have some other weak verbal roots. Biconsonantal, two consonants are typically considered weak. Oftentimes biconsonantal was originally tri, and the third one fell off, and now it's bi. Matter of fact, sometimes you'll see actually in the older Hebrew and the Pentateuch, for example, it'll be written with the tri, and then you'll find it in some of the newer Hebrew, relatively speaking, written with the bi. And then you have what's called geminate. A geminate would be like I'm a Gemini. I was born a Gemini. I'm a twin. I was born a twin. So it just happened to be a Gemini born twin. Well, geminate is a similar thing. It's two Daves. There'd be a Dave on this side and a Dave on this side. And basically, we're considered weak because there's two of us. You say two heads are better than one, not in geminate. It's been a long day, guys. You have to endure my joke today, okay? So the geminate would have two consonants together, generally in root position 2 and root position 3, two lamets, two baits, two whatever so when they put them side by side and then it's a geminate, two consonants together, they're considered weak, which means they could change. Often that third one could drop off or change as a result. So we're not spending time on the weak consonants. I just want you to be aware that they exist. I want to give you a feel for how the Hebrew works in a very structured form. So you can say, okay, that's not so bad. And without creating a lot of confusion, because what happens is when you start looking at the geminate forms, the weak consonant forms, that's where it looks complex. But once you sort of get the basic down with the strong, and you say, oh, I see what's happening, and then you understand what happens to a weak consonant when it changes, why it changed, it's not that hard. But when you look at it, you go like, wow, that's a lot. But it's really, there's a pattern to all of it. It's not that bad. Okay, so there is a typical verbal order, or word order used. It's not like in Greek or in English. English is pretty consistent in its word order. It's subject, verb, object, and then any modifiers associated with that. Greek will typically want to start with, I'm drawing a blank now. Greek doesn't emphasize word order as much. That's where it's going. Sometimes, if the verb or some words are used at the beginning of a sentence, it might be because it's emphasis. It's emphasis. Same thing with the end. Sometimes it's pretty obvious, and sometimes it's not as obvious. So word order does matter in Greek, but not as much. Mostly because they're trying to put emphasis in some cases, not all cases. Hebrew does have a standard or typical word order, and that is with the verb, subject, object, whether you're talking about the sentence or in a clause, relative clause, or whatever the case may be. Typically a verb, subject, object would be the form, although that is not constant. It does change considerably often, but that's the typical. So we see an example here. God created the heavens and the earth. That's our English. God is a subject, created is a verb, and the object, it's a double object. It's two of the heavens and the earth. In Hebrew, bara is the verb. It's the first word in the sentence. Bara Elohim, eight is the third word during the sentence, is a marker, descriptive marker, and it does not have pronunciation to it or translation. It is descriptive marker to mark the object. That's how I know the heavens. That is, there's our Dagesh Forte under the Shem, Hashamayim, and that is the heavens. That's how I know it's the object. And then we have another 8 words, except this time it has a vav in front of it. Vav and typically means and or but or also within. So this is the and haaretz, that is and the earth. So God created the heavens and the earth. And so there is a typical standard order, although it's not always the same. We parse Hebrew verbs very much like parsing Greek. In Hebrew, we're going to start with the nifal, that is the stem, and then the conjugation. Here's the perfect, third masculine singular, and its lexical form is from shama. So nishma is the, notice we have the noon in front of it, in the prefix. Our root is the shem, then the mem, and then the ayin. That's the root. Notice the third root position is the ayin. It's a weak consonant. Doesn't affect us here, but it would in other spellings. But if I wanted to, that's the shema would be the call, that is the active, passive, perfect, third masculine singular, not passive, active, the simple action, perfect conjugation, third masculine singular. To make it passive, then you just put the noon in front of it with the heric and make other adjustments, and you get the nishma, and that's now a passive form. I think that's I think I have it in another place somewhere. I want to say it's not he heard. I forget now. I think I've got it somewhere here. Yeah, it is he heard. That's right. He heard. So the active call would be shama. To make it passive, we put in the nifal. And the nifal perfect third masculine singular would be how we would parse this. Parse means you divide, showing the parts of it. So it's a nifal stem, perfect conjugation. It's third masculine singular, and it's from the root, or from the lexical form is shama. Yeah. Let me catch up here. Okay, everybody online awake? Didn't lose anyone so far? And so we talked about the call stem. That was not really rhetorical. That was just sort of, well, let's see if we go away. The call stem, of course, constitutes over almost 70% of all the Hebrew verbal system. That's why we spend more time on it. And once you learn to call and its various strong and weak forms, once you get that down, then the others are really just modifications of that. And so it's not that hard. But you spend your time in the call, the simple, active, passive form of it, and its other forms, its other conjugations, and whether it be in the strong or weak, whether you're talking about strong consonants or word with weak consonants, once you sort of get that down, the others become pretty straightforward. The call stems are active in voice and simple on nuanced action. And then the simple action of the call is further divided into, I'm going to spend a lot of time with this because this is standard. Transitive meaning it receives, the verb is doing the object, is transferring action onto the object, the direct object. So it's transitive, it's transferring the action to the direct object. Intransitive, meaning there is no transfer of action. There is no direct object associated with the verb. And stative would be similar in the sense, except it's more equative. This is where you use the to be verbs, is, was, has been, will be, those kind of things. And so we looked at the call stem and the perfect conjugation, third masculine singular, katal, meaning to kill. So this would be, typically we put in the past tense, I killed, or he killed, excuse me. It'd be third masculine singular, he killed. And notice that the conates and the potic are the two vowels under root 1 and root 2, under the kof and the tet. And the perfect conjugation expresses that completed action we already mentioned, or state of being, whether past, present, or future we mentioned. The Hebrew perfect verbs are most often translated in English past tense. We've mentioned this. I wrote. Of the present tense, I have written, but they always try to put it in the past form, whether you're talking about present or future. I will have written. It still would be the call. Perfect conjugation. So we looked at the call perfect in sort of this verbal paradigm. Basically, we have, if we want it to be third masculine singular, it stays in its very simple form, katal. But if you want to speak to, or if it's speaking to a feminine, third and feminine singular, or just add the conates hey at the end of it. That may change its form, its spelling, simply because oftentimes you try to put the emphasis at the end of the word, and that forces some changes in the beginning of the word. And so katal goes to katla. And so instead of he killed, it's she killed. The second masculine singular, we typically use this is talking about the call perfect form. Okay, these suffixes will change for other stems, but in the call perfect, it will change for the passive. And under the second masculine singular, it's katalat, and so second, you killed. Second feminine singular, katal tet. That is feminine. Second thing, you killed also, but it's feminine. First common singular, katal ti, I killed. Third common plural, katlu, they killed. Second masculine plural, katalten, you killed. And also you killed. Second feminine plural though, katalten, that's the final noon, katalten. So instead of kataltim, it's now kataltin, and that will go from second masculine plural to second feminine plural. And then first common plural is katalnu, and so we killed. There's a pattern. You basically notice that most feminine is going to have the kamates hey or the tav with the segol or shavar under it. The plurals typically have the mem at the end or the noon. The noon typically would be feminine and those kind of things. So those can help you stand out once you sort of begin to recognize it. And so you get these other words, and just so you see how no matter what word, no matter what roots you use, it's the same process, the same form, the same pattern. Where you're talking about yashav, to dwell. You see the same pattern going down, third feminine singular to the first common plural. Or zakar, to remember, or katav, to write, or shamar, to keep, or kavatz, to gather. Same pattern all the way through. I know I'm going a little quick with these, but we're just reviewing. More review, maybe something might stick. Maybe it might stick with me. I'm still trying to review. And then we move from the perfect. Now, perfect conjugation in the call is, of course, talking about a completed action. Now, in the call to an incomplete action, something that might be ongoing or reiterative or something of this nature. Imperfect conjugation used to express incomplete or habitual or customary, whether past, present, future. The Hebrew imperfect forms, verbs are most often translated in English present tense, I study, or future tense, I will study. And that's really the significance of it. So you could have, for example, here's called yiktol. Matter of fact, you'll find a lot of grammars, they'll call it the yiktol sim in the imperfect, because that's the standard grammatical example for the imperfect conjugation of the call. And you notice the word is yiktol. It's the same word before to kill, katal. In the Hebrew, we had katal. And now we put in an imperfect form, we added the yod with the hirik underneath, and that second root position for remember our roots are the kaf, the tav, and the lamed. There's the root 1, root 2, root 3. The yod and the hirik are not part of the root. It's the stem that's added to it, the prefix. And so that's yiktol. And the significant changes, of course, is that you've added the hirik, the yod with the hirik, and you've changed the root 2 to a holem, yod, and so the call stem, strong verb, imperfect conjugation. It's a different pattern for the suffixes, for whether you're talking about third masculine plural. Third masculine plural is not a different pattern. There's nothing there. But the others will be different from in the perfect conjugation. The pattern here is if there's always a prefix, it's either going to be the yod with the hirik or the tav with the hirik, except for the common singular and the common plural. Those are different. Notice the first common singular is going to be the aleph with the segol, and the first common plural will be the noon with the hirik. But the rest are going to be with the tav, with the hirik, except for the third masculine plural and the third masculine singular. Those are the yod with the hirik. The suffix is a different pattern from our perfect conjugation. You can see that there. I won't go through all this to bore everybody, but you can see the changes in the pattern. And you can notice that the third feminine singular and the second masculine singular have the exact same pattern. The only way you know the difference is by context in the text. And the same with the third feminine plural and the second feminine plural. They look exactly the same. And the only way you know the difference is going to be the context. So you see, here's our call. The top line, zakar, katav, shamar, and kavatz. Those are in the call third masculine singular, perfect form. To modify them to the imperfect conjugation, we see you put a prefix to every single one, and you have a suffix for added for certain third person number and gender, and it follows a pretty constant pattern. Any questions so far? Have I bored everybody? Okay. And so then last week we went from the call perfect and imperfect to the nifal perfect and imperfect. The only difference is the call, of course, is active voice, and the nifal is a passive voice. They're simple action. And so we looked at this last week. A simple action is either passive or reflexive. And so we saw the nifal passive for niktol, that is, katal is for to kill, and niktol, it should be, I think, niktol. Niktal, I think I'll have to double check that. It's translated, he was killed, or in reflective, he killed himself. And so I modified this just to see, the change. The nifal stem, perfect conjugation, derived from the call perfect third masculine singular, which is simple, completed action, active voice. You see the change when it goes to the nifal perfect strong verb, also simple, completed action, but now it's a passive voice. And it changes by adding putting a prefix to it with the noon and the hirik. And this is correct. So, and the tav, third root position, is going to be with the kamates. And so we go from katal to niktal, and now it's a passive function. It's really that straightforward. It is to me. I don't know if you guys see the same thing. Of course, I've looked at it for a little while, so it's a little unfair to you. And so if you look at the nifal and compare it to the call, because it derives from the call, you can see the changes made to it. And there you have in the prefix the noon with the hirik underneath it. That's a pretty big clue. Okay, now it's functioning passively. And then, of course, you have the suffix that's added to it. And you notice the suffix for the perfect conjugation are the same, whether you're talking about the call stem or the nifal stem. And then if you go to the imperfect, which we looked at last week, our imperfect call imperfect third masculine is also simple, but it's an incomplete action with an active voice. And the nifal imperfect is also simple, but incomplete action, but it's a passive voice. Yeah, I got the wrong word there. Nikto. Yeah, that's right. I'm sorry. Nikto. That's right. That's a passive voice. So where it says the call imperfect third masculine singular, simple, incomplete action, active voice under Nikto, that's a passive voice, not active. So I knew something didn't look right. That's what that is. For the nifal imperfect, you see we have the yod still with the herrick underneath. But the difference is that we have the first root position has a doggish forte in it. That's a doubling, and a comates underneath it. And that becomes ikata. So instead of ito, it's ikata. And so we looked at it last week, and from the call to the nifal, you see it's the same pattern for the nifal. All the nifals, either the yo herrick or the ta herrick, except of course for the first common singular plural. And then it uses the same suffixes as the imperfect does in the call, so it's the same pattern. Yeah, I know you don't memorize those, so. But tonight I want to spend a little time on the two more verbal stems, bintons. That is the PL stem, and we'll look again perfect, and then we'll look at the imperfect. You see why I didn't do a whole lot more, because really this just keeps going and going and going. It's like the ever-ready funny. The PL system is used to express intensive action, where the call in the nifal was simple action. He opened the door was open for him. Those are simple actions. The PL, whereas the Pual, as well as the Pual, are intensive actions. So if he opened the door was slammed, or he slammed the door. The door was slammed on him. It's more intensified. But in the perfect stem conjugation, it's going to be an active voice. The PL, for example, shiber, is translated, he smashed into pieces. And just to see the variation, so it derives from its call perfect, third masculine singular, simple, completed action, active voice, katal, he killed, to a perfect PL, perfect strong verb, kitel, keeptel. Yeah, remember I got a doubling. So I'm going to point at the picture, but you guys online, you just have to guess where I'm pointing. So the under the PL perfect strong verb, you have the herrick underneath the first root position, the kaf herrick. The tav has still the cetera underneath the second root position, or the tet, but it has the little red dot in the center that's the doggish forte, so it's a doubling. And so it's yeektel. But it's an intensive, completed action, active voice. The change you can see still dealing with the same root letters, the kaf, tav, kaf, tet, and lamet, and the call perfect third masculine is katal. PL perfect strong verb is keeptel. And so also active voice. And same kind of format. You see the changes made from the call to the PL. It's called the PL because notice the first vowel is the herrick, I sound, and the second is a cetera, sort of a long E cell, PL. And you see that same pattern. Notice the red on the right there for the PL column with the herrick underneath the first root position, and the second root position has the red doggish forte in it, but it also has the typically, well, the third masculine singer will have the cetera, but the rest will change. It changes in talking about the second root position. It changes because we've added we put some consonants and vowels on the suffix, so that changes it. It's still referred to as a PL, and you sort of lose that cetera under root 2 position. But you're supposed to see the doggish forte there. Now, when you put a weak verb, a weak consonant in that second position, then you don't have the doggish forte. It makes it a little bit harder to recognize. That's why weak verbs can be a little more confusing and complex. But a weak verb won't take that doggish forte. So it makes it a little harder to see. So we go from he slaughtered, katal, meaning he killed, to yeektel, he slaughtered. To she slaughtered, you slaughtered, the second masculine singular, second feminine singular. To I slaughtered, they slaughtered, again, you plural slaughtered, and you plural feminine slaughtered, and then we slaughtered. It's a intensified action from the katal, which is a simple action. The imperfect is very much like the imperfect from the katal, from the call. We're still using I killed, he killed, katal form. Here's the yik tol and the imperfect call, third masculine singular. And the PL would also be active voice, but it's going to be intensive action. So it's yikatel. So we have a vocal shiva with the pyrrhic, with the yod, and as part of the prefix. We got our same root letters, the kaf, the tav, and the lamed, and the vowel patterns changed a little bit. And we get yikatel, intensive incompleted action, active voice. And so it'd be something more like he, remember it's incomplete, so it's something typically present or future. He will slaughter, she will slaughter, so forth. And you can see the difference. It's the same prefix as our call imperfect conjugation for the call and the PL. There's certainly, and you can see the changes into the root that's done. What you notice there, in all cases, is under the PL, you have the dogged forte in the second root position. And that's part of that pattern. Then we move to, instead of also intensive, but now it's going to be passive pual. The pual is going to be a passive, intensive action, but a passive voice. For example, for Schubert, is translated he or it was smashed into pieces. It's more intensive, but now it's being done to the item or the person. And again, seeing the change from our call perfect third masculine singular and the active voice katal to intensive completed action passive voice kutal, kutal, katal to kutal. And notice the shirik underneath it. There's not a whole lot of shiriks used. There's some. But relative to the other, the kamates and the padek and the hirik, there's not many shiriks used relative to them. And so it makes it pretty easy to stand out. Kutal, an intensive completed action passive voice, and it will typically mean, again, that reads active voice and passive, so I'm a little confused with this graph. I didn't notice that before. Pual strong, perfect. Okay, it's perfect. Let me see if I'm reading something right here. Passive voice. I should be in the passive voice for the pual. But that those read, I'll have to double check this. That is pual. But all those translations read active. He slaughtered, she slaughtered, you slaughtered, I slaughtered, just like we saw before. So I need to double check this. It doesn't read passive. It reads active voice. It should be more like he was slaughtered or she was slaughtered or you were slaughtered, you have been slaughtered. I was slaughtered. They were slaughtered. We were slaughtered. That would be passive, intensive action. So I'm not sure why that's not there. I'll double check that. Now we same pual, same passive, but now we'll go from perfect to imperfect. Oh, that's why. Wait a minute. Passive. Yeah, pual's passive no matter what, okay? Doesn't matter if I'm talking completed or incomplete, it's still passive. So that should be passive. And so here we have the pual imperfect conjugation. So it's yikutel, yikutal, and intensive action, incomplete, passive voice. And again, it's reading active. Maybe there's something I'm missing here. I'll double check this and get back with you next week. These all read active and not passive. He will slaughter, it's future because they're showing the imperfect conjugation, but the passive aspect or the pual is not being depicted here. I'm not sure why. I'll double check that. Did I confuse everybody? Everybody know what I'm talking about? Robert, you okay? The laugh says no. Okay.
Well, I'm just confused because you're.
Well, I'm confused why it's not being translated in a passive sense. The PL is active voice. He slaughtered, she slaughtered. The Pual is a passive voice. Now, whether you're talking about a perfect or imperfect conjugation, completed or incomplete, doesn't really matter. Passive is passive. So if the PL is translated as he slaughtered, I slaughtered, you slaughtered, the Pual should be he was slaughtered, I was slaughtered, you were slaughtered, something of this nature. Now, perfect conjugation would be something that occurred that's completed, slaughtered. He was slaughtered. She was slaughtered. Passive, completed, perfect. Imperfect would be something that's ongoing. So it'd be more like he will slaughter, or she will slaughter. But to make it passive, it would be maybe that's how would you make it future passive? He will be slaughtered. Yes. She will be slaughtered. Passive being done to her. I don't see the passive here. That's the part that's bothering me. I don't know why. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So I got to double check. I might be missing something. Maybe it's not supposed to depict it in the translation, but that would be odd to me. So I have to look at it and get back to you next week. And that's a cut and paste in the slide from the random book. So there must be something I'm missing. So I'm going to go look and see what I'm missing. And so we're going to finish early because I don't have a couple of reasons. I mentioned at the beginning of the class. We'll finish early tonight for a couple of reasons. Number one, I'm worn out and you're worn out. Number two, because we're nearing the end. Number two, I'm literally worn out because I'm just tired. Number three, ultimately, we have looked at the exegetical practices, or excuse me, the exegetical principles up to last week. And we looked at a couple of different books and how they suggest we draw out from the passage and how we look at a broader perspective and not just focusing on the word, but look beyond the word, understanding the author, the audience, understanding the context, understanding context in the meta-narrative, in the bigger picture, all these kind of things. I don't feel it's necessary to continue stressing that. We've already went through 2 books and they're 12 chapters each, and we sort of summarized that. And hopefully you have a good idea of that. The goal is to look beyond just the word. It's not enough to say, do a word study on the word. The word study is on the context and its bigger picture. The author, the audience, all these things play a role and so much more. And that's what we spent time looking at. There's not a lot of sense in just keep being repetitive with it. So I don't have that. So that's shortened our class tonight. And tonight, our practical exegesis is going to look at something specifically, at least from an Old Testament Hebrew perspective. And it won't take us a lot. I'm not going to do a lot of depth in it, in part because I was a little bit out of time, and I didn't put a lot of, wasn't able to put as much depth as I would like. However, what I have is something we don't typically look at in the Old Testament, and that is the resurrection. And so I want to look at the resurrection in the Old Testament, how it leads to us. Oh, I know I made the physical change. It should be session 13, but oh well. So in the Old Testament, there's really 3, there's not a lot of examples of resurrection. Certainly that would be odd and different. Now in the New Testament, listen, resurrection, our foundation depends upon, our Christianity depends upon the resurrected Christ. And our hope for resurrection stems from his resurrection. And so we are much more understanding and recognizing the resurrection because of Christ's resurrection. In the Old Testament, resurrection, it was an odd thing in today's world. We don't see people resurrected, but we have faith and know because of Christ's resurrection, we have the hope for resurrection. In the Old Testament, it wasn't the case. There are 3 examples of specific resurrections. There's several other places where there's implied or discussion that lead to a New Testament understanding of resurrection. I just want to touch on a few of these. One is the three examples that are used is from hey, and then kum, and well, if I read right to left, we'll go right to left. Pada, kum, and hey. And so we'll look at these three and their usages. They're used more than just three places, but they're three places that are very specific in resurrection language. Direct reference to resurrection in the Old Testament is pretty rare. That is coming back to life after a physical death. That's really what we're talking about. There are three specific examples. So let's look at those in your Bibles, 2 Kings. We'll look at it in English unless you brought your Hebrew Bible with you. If that's the case, then I'll let you read the Hebrew. 1 Kings, that's first one's 1 Kings, 17. 1 Kings 17. Now the context here, dealing with, of course, you remember Elijah with speaking to Ahab with regard to the drought that's going to come, that the Lord has told him. And of course, then Elijah then is told to leave the land and go to Zarephath. I'm sure I pronounced that wrong. And stay there with a widow that he's commanded to take care of him. He goes. He arrives at the widow's home. The widow has enough bread or flour and oil to make enough bread for her and her son for them to die because they don't have anything left. However, of course, through the miraculous means, there's the flour pot never empties and the oil pot never dries up. But our passage deals with, of course, that the widow's son in verse 17 and following. So let's read that in English. We'll talk about the Hebrew as we go. And so, verse 17, now it came about after these things that the son of the woman, the mistress of the house, became sick, and his sickness became sick, and his sickness was so severe that there was no breath left in him. Obviously, that means he died, right? In verse 18, so she said to Elijah, what do I have to do with you, O man of God? You have come to me to bring my iniquity to remembrance and to put my son to death. I find it interesting here, the Old Testament perspective, and it is in a lot of people for the New Testament, that their sins, their iniquity results in their, I won't say death, but it results in their troubles. And so she is recognizing her iniquities bringing troubles to her, and this prophet Elijah has come, and as a result, his son died. I just thought that was, to me, it's always interesting how that is perceived. Verse 19, he said to her, give me your son. And he took him from the bosom and carried him to the upper room where he was living, and he laid on his own bed. So in his room, in Elijah's room, in his bed. And he called the Lord and said, O Lord God, you have also brought calamity to the widow with whom I'm staying by causing her son to die. It's also fascinating to understand where Elijah puts the responsibility. God gives life and God takes away life. In verse 21, then he stretched himself upon the child 3 times and called to the Lord, saying, O Lord, my God, I pray you, let this child's life return to him. The Lord heard the voice of Elijah, and the life of the child returned to him, and he revived. Elijah took the child and brought him down from the upper room into the house and gave him to his mother. And Elijah said, see, your son is alive. The woman said to Elijah, now I know that you are a man of God. The word of the Lord is in your mouth. And the word of the Lord in your mouth is true. I always thought it was fascinating that it took the resurrection to recognize the truth. But yet here this miraculous gift of food, of flour and oil that never empties wasn't sufficient. That is significant when you think about the New Testament, isn't it? It takes the resurrection to know the truth. And I think that brings something for us to think about. Let's talk about a little more. Elijah resurrected this boy. It describes him as a return to life. And that is from the word hey. Which it's an adjective that means life or living, and it refers to the state of something or someone being alive. The noun and the adjective are extremely common in the Old Testament. The statement that someone is restored to the state of being alive are relevant for the concepts of resurrection, but they make up a minority of uses. In other words, it's an adjective and a noun that's used often, but seldom does it refer to coming back to life. And here's an instance where it does. Isaiah 53 verse 8 is another example. The poet, if we look at Isaiah 53 verse 8 really quickly, we have time because we're early. Isaiah's in the Old Testament, right? That's before Jeremiah. 53, famous chapter. Okay, verse 8. By oppression and judgment, he was taken away, and as for our generation, who was considered, and as for his generation, who was considered, that he was cut off of the land of the living for the transgression of the people to whom the stroke was due. So cut off from the land of the living, that's hay. And so the poet figuratively describes death as being cut off from the land of the living, and this is in the plural hayem. Biblical poetry often uses the phrase land of the living to refer to the present world. And numerous Psalms affirm that God is the one with the power either to remove someone from the land of the living or preserve them. You go look at Psalms 27, verse 13, 52, verse 5, Psalm 116, verse 9, Psalm 142, verse 5. All of these refer to the land of the living and God's power to preserve them or to remove them from that land of the living. And so 1 Kings 17, 2, verse 23 gives us a sort of a picture of, a clear picture of a resurrection. And even it has some implied prophetic perspective, I think, anyways, my opinion, of the New Testament resurrection of Jesus Christ. Not that it's referring specifically to Jesus Christ, but the fact that she saw truth in the resurrection, I think is significant. So the second example we have is from 2 Kings chapter 4 and verse 34, a very similar, well, excuse me, not a similar word, as Hamam, yeah. 2 Kings 4 and verse 34. 4 and verse 34. And so here again is, now here's Elijah, not Elijah, Elisha, where he brings a boy back to life and returns to life as described as his flesh becoming warm. So if we read in verses 30, well, so how much do I want to read here? I guess just 34 is all I have in my notes. But this is, of course, the Shunammite son. Remember, the Shunammite, Elijah is with the Shunammite woman. She has taken care of him. Elijah travels to the king on a recurring basis. He often is invited for a meal with the Shunammite woman, and the Shunammite woman tells her husband, you know, hey, the prophet is coming by. Why don't we build a room for him to stay with a table? They can, you know, sit and relax on his travels. And so he does that for some period of time. And so Elijah speaks to his servant, Gehazi, about her needs. And it becomes recognizable that she has no child. And so through prayers, she is given a child. But then in verse 34, the child dies. In verse 34, and he went up, and of course she's upset because she didn't ask for the child. And now calamity has come upon her because, you know, this prophet has brought her a child that resulted in calamity, resulted in death. So verse 34, and he went up and lay on the child's, and put his mouth on his mouth and his eyes on his eyes, his hands on his hands, and he stretched himself on him, and the flesh of the child became warm. I wouldn't say that's like mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. I think some people look at that. I think it's him laying face-to-face, hand-to-hand on him, warming his body in the sense that, you know, it's bringing life back to him. Verse 35, they returned, and the child became warm. That's what it says. And so Elijah brings the boy back to life. It's described as his flesh. That's a different Hebrew word, becoming warm. That's our word here, hakmam. And that is another second example. There he is talked about where he to live. Hakmam is to live, to return to life, to preserve life, to restore life. Basic meaning of to live more often or specifically implied return to health, or return to life in context involving sickness or death. Someone can be sick and return to life doesn't mean they die. And that's the context typically used. But here we have an example of returning to life from death. And that's the example that's given here. Then we have another example. Wait a minute, I'm not there yet. Let's see. Let me look at my notes. My number system's off, so I'm taking a minute here just to see. I number my notes to know to which point to go to. Yeah, that's all I have for that. Okay. So the third example is in 2 Kings chapter 13, verses 20 through 21. And here's a similar word from pay. This is an extension or not a modification, but similar. Chaye. And in 2 Kings 13, verse 20 through 21. So just over a couple of chapters or so. And verses 20 through 21. And this, of course, again, is with Elijah. And remember, Elijah dies. And what happens after he dies? He's buried, right? Well, now someone else died. We don't know who this person is. Someone else dies. And they had to hurriedly throw him in the grave because some bandits were coming. So they hurriedly throw him in the grave. And what happens to the guy? All right, let's read it. And so in verse, what was I at? In verse 20. In verse 20, Elijah died and was buried, and they buried him. Now the bands of the Moabites would invade the land in the spring of the year. And as they were burying a man, behold, they saw a marauding band, that's bad people, and they cast the man into the grave of Elisha. In other words, they threw him in there because they had to get out of there. And when the man touched the bones of Elijah, he revived and stood on his feet. Now, let's see. Yeah, that's all I want to read. So here we have this resurrection of some unknown guy who touched the bones of Elisha. So there's three specific examples of a resurrection. We have other examples that are speak, I don't say a specific example, but implied or not examples of a physical resurrection. These are three physical resurrections, okay? Others, for example, Ezekiel 37. Anybody know what Ezekiel 37 talks to? The valley of dry bones, right? And of course, it's speaking not just to the resurrection of life, but to the restoration of Israel. And Isaiah 26 also speaks of resurrection and restoration of Israel. The idea, let's look at Isaiah 26 for a minute. I want to point something out. What's significant is here in Isaiah 26, it speaks to not just the resurrection of life for the righteous, but also a resurrection of condemnation for the wicked. Now, obviously, it's not speaking of physical, an example, but it's talking in a prophetic way. So in Isaiah 26, I'm trying to remember where exactly that was. I didn't put it in my notes. Yes, instead of reading the whole thing, although we have time to read the whole thing, it's only 21 verses. I don't want to bore everybody. But let's go back to verse 16. O Lord, they sought you in distress. They could only whisper a prayer. Your chastening was upon them. This is, of course, Israel. As the pregnant woman approaches the time to give birth, she writhers and cries and labor and pains. Thus were we before you, O Lord. We were pregnant and writhered in labor. We gave birth, as it seems, only to the wind. In other words, we didn't produce anything. We could not accomplish deliverance for the earth, nor were the inhabitants of the world born. Now notice verse 19. Your dead will live, their corpses will rise. You who lie in the dust, awake and shout for joy. For your dew is the dew of the dawn, and the earth will give birth to the departed spirits. So the significance is here. Let's see. The dead will live, the corpses will rise. You who lie in the dust, awake and shout for joy. Well, that's not the. I was looking for the passage where it also tells us about. Maybe I'm reading the wrong passage. Let's see. Yeah, that's not what I was using. Eddie mentioned verse 21, for behold, the Lord is about to come from his place to punish the inhabitants of the earth for their iniquity, and the earth will reveal the bloodshed and will no longer cover their slain. It's not referring to their eternal resurrection to condemnation. I thought I wrote it down, but I'm currently looking in the wrong place. So maybe let me go through my notes real quick. So, yeah, let's look at Psalm 49, 10 through 15. That might be it. I might be looking in the wrong place. Psalm 49. Psalm 49, verses 10 through 15. Let me back up to verse 8, verse 7. No man can by any means redeem his brother or give to God a ransom for him, for the redemption of his soul is costly, and he should cease trying forever, that he should live on eternally, and then he should not undergo decay. For he sees that even wise men die, the stupid and the senseless alike perish and leave their wealth to others. Their inner thought is that their houses are forever and their dwellings places to all generations. And they have called their lands after their own names. But man is in his pomp will not endure. He is like the beast that perishes. This is the way of those who are foolish, and those after them who approve the words. I'll follow that down, verse 15. As the sheep are appointed to Sheol, death shall be their shepherd, and the upright shall rule over them in the morning. And their form shall be for Sheol to consume, so that they have no habitation. But God will redeem my soul from the power of Sheol, for he will receive me. So there's a picture of a resurrection from Sheol for the righteous. I thought it seems to imply, and I'm sorry, I thought I had this, and I don't know why. This is what happens when I'm rushing this afternoon to try to get this together, and I thought I had it. Yeah, you're right. Listen, I know where Daniel 12. That's where I want to go. Sorry, guys. It's not like y'all have anything else to do, right? Daniel chapter 12. This is an apocalyptic area of Daniel. And verses 1 through 4. Yeah, I think this is it. Yeah. Chapter 12, verses 1 to verse 2 is where the emphasis is. That's it. Okay, I knew I read it. I just couldn't remember it. All right, in verse 1. Now at that time, Michael, the great prince who stands guard over the sons of your people, will rise, and there will be a time of distress such as never occurred since that there was a nation until that time. That time, your people, everyone, at that time, your people, everyone who is found written in the book, will be rescued. There's a picture of righteous resurrection. Many of those who sleep in the dust of the ground will awake, these to everlasting life, but others to disgrace and everlasting contempt. So the Old Testament does speak to resurrection. It's just not prominent. And if you move forward in time from the first century, or even before then, you have the Pharisees and the Sadducees, right? And the Sadducees were sad, you see. No, that's the old joke. Sadducees were sad because they didn't believe in the resurrection, right? Pharisees did. And so there was some confusion in this. So resurrection wasn't a high view early on, and it began to take root as we move towards the first century. And that's significant as we see Christ come into in this incarnation, and he comes into the earth. And of course, the resurrection now has been planted. We see the seeds of it in the Old Testament, but it's been planted in thoughts and minds, even in the first century, where they began to take awareness of it. Daniel 12 is the clearest example of a bodily resurrection of the prophets, later prophets especially, where the resurrection there is closely connected to God's overall plan for his redemptive people. And that leads us right into, of course, Daniel 12 is prophetic for, matter of fact, later on, I think it's Daniel 12, where they tells Daniel to shut up the book, to close it, not to write it anymore, to write it, but not to close it, so that people not know. And of course, Revelation picks up where Daniel left off. The New Testament reflects the reality that the Old Testament ambiguity about resurrection had encouraged skepticism and ongoing resistance within the Judaism, ancient Judaism especially, to the idea of a bodily resurrection that we see in Acts chapter 4 and Acts chapter 23. Belief in the resurrection of the dead is a core tenet we know of Christianity. 1 Corinthians 15, verse 1 through 4. 1 Peter 1, verse 3. The Second Temple Judaism period was sharply divided, as we were talking about earlier, over bodily resurrection. See, in most places earlier on, they spoke of or understood the resurrection more to restoration. Now, you have the physical examples of restoration, resurrection that we mentioned, but the other implied or specific, not examples, but discussion of resurrection or to be brought back, or often interpreted to be the restoration, not a resurrection. But as you move further and further toward the New Testament period, there becomes a divide. That's a bodily resurrection speaking to, prophetically speaking of. The Pharisees believed the resurrection of the dead. Sadducees rejected that. We see Matthew 22, Acts 23. Paul played on this ambiguity between the two, as you know, when he was arrested in Acts 22. And yeah, I got the quote, but I don't want to read the quote. You know it. And so outside in the Gospels and in Acts, the New Testament concern for resurrection are primarily focused on the resurrection of Christ as the fundamental truth of the gospel, right? That's what we understand. It's part of our evangelical, part of our apologetics, giving a defense, is to emphasize and recognize the reality of resurrected Christ, because our hope of eternal life depends upon that. And for what does Paul say? We are surely to be pitied if not for the resurrection. And so that the precursor of the resurrection we find in the Old Testament. And so to see that carried through, to me, is a fascinating study. So much more you could do and with that. And I want to point out a couple more passages here to deal with that. There are other Old Testament inferences, and we sort of touched on some of these. The Hebrew word kum, the verb, can express resurrection as a rising from death. It's parallel with where we saw chaya, to live, and we see it used in Isaiah 26 and Hosea 6 and other Old Testament passages. Present death as preventing rising again. And then you have the word keets, where it's awakening from a natural sleep. Well, we understand that oftentimes, not always, sleep is a euphemism and refers to death. If you're going to wake from a euphemistic death, that's a resurrection. So metaphorically, it's figuratively to awakening to life from death. Elijah, as we read in 2 Kings chapter 4, was a good example. We didn't read this part, he sent his servant, Gehazi, to raise the Sidonite son with his staff, put the staff on his face. It didn't work. He goes back to, he's not awake. Well, the reference here is that he did not rise from sleep into death, or to life. And of course, that's when Elijah, as we read, I think in verse 20, 21, where he went and laid out upon him, and he warmed, his body came back to warm. And that is the picture of resurrection. Also, Daniel chapter 12, verse 2 that we read, described resurrection as the dead awakening. That's the word keys. Job chapter 14, verse 12 speaks of the normal state of mankind, emphasizing the dead do not awake. That is the word keys. So it's referring to being awake. And in this case, Job says not awake. Third usage here is Okay, Allah, and it's the verb to go up or to ascend, generally referring to sort of ascent and a sort of spatial, that is a spatial sphere, and figuratively to ascend from the underworld or to the grave, from Sheol or the grave. Sheol would be, it's hard to say whether, when in some places where they speak about Sheol, if they're talking about the underworld, that is the center of the earth kind of thing, under the earth, or the grave. The grave is also considered Sheol. And so Old Testament makes it a little difficult oftentimes to differentiate, but essentially it's a saying in that sense. And of course, Sheol would contain, it's almost like the Catholic purgatory, it would contain all the dead, but you would see this picture of resurrection of righteousness versus resurrection of, well, you didn't see so much a resurrection of the wicked, but more of a resurrection coming back to life. They didn't use the word resurrection, coming back to life, or to redeem, or to ascend from the underworld or from the Sheol, would be often. And then the last word that I want to bring out is padah. This is where God ransoms or liberates Israel from slavery. It's what's typically used in Deuteronomy 7, Deuteronomy 9, where he ransoms them, liberates them from the slavery and exile in Babylon, Isaiah 51 and such. But this concept of ransom, this padah, was also used as a metaphor, God liberating his people from death. Psalm 49, verse 15. Let's go back to Psalm. Psalm 49, verse 15. I know we got past for a break, but we're going to finish after this. Okay? I feel like in Steve's class, we just go on and we'll take a break maybe later. Okay. Psalm 49, verse 15. Sorry about that. But God will redeem my soul from the power of Sheol. He will receive me. And so there's this depiction of God liberating and ransoming, redeeming a soul out of Sheol. Sheol is a place of the dead. And so the righteous or God redeems or ransom, buys back for liberating people from death. Yeah, I think that's, I had a few more notes, but I think that'll cover what I want to think about. So, I mean, what I want to bring out, the reason I thought it was interesting is that we understand resurrection from the New Testament perspective, and how our hope is based upon the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and our hope for resurrection for eternal life. Old Testament studies took a while for people to recognize a bodily resurrection. Three specific bodily resurrection examples: 1 Kings and 2 Kings. I forget the chapters now. But there's many other places where it speaks of coming, arising, ascending, a ransom, or redeeming, that early on might have been looked at as a restoration. But over time, it becomes more focused and emphasizing a bodily resurrection, a prophetic bodily resurrection that then leads us into Christ's incarnation, his death, burial, and his bodily spiritual resurrection, which not just spiritual, it's bodily resurrection. I mean, he tells Thomas, "Put your hands, touch the holes in my hands," and so to me, it's a great study. There's a whole lot more to probably get done with that. Well, probably could be done with that. And any thoughts or questions on that? I didn't bring the New Testament. Of course, you have about 3 or 4 different words: ergo, to rise up, and then anastasis, that is to resurrect. And so there's 3 different Greek words that lead into the New Testament. And what I didn't do is look at the Septuagint to see how they translate these, but I think it's the ergo and anastasis words. I didn't really double check that. So. Yeah. Any thoughts or questions? Okay, everybody online awake, because we're working here.
Yes, we're here.
Thank you. I knew I counted on James.
I even laughed at your joke too, by the way.
Did you really?
I did.
Thank you. You know, I'm tired when I sort of get trying to make stupid jokes. My daughter used to just roll her eyes. She still does, but I still make the jokes. I don't care.
Well, you have a nice comedic pause. So
Okay.
I'm learning when that comedic pause appears.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And once you learn, would you teach my wife and daughter, please? I'd appreciate it. And listen, I enjoyed it tonight. Thank you. We're going to finish early. Probably finish a little early next week as well. Like I said, I don't want to prolong things. The intent is to get a feel for both the Greek and the Hebrew and how you can apply it in your ministry, specifically in your preaching and in your studies. And you just don't want to emphasize the word, but you emphasize all the aspects that we looked at. And that's really not trying to make you Hebrew grammarians or Greek grammarians, but one who can use the tools properly and fully in a way that enhances your study, your life, your personal ministry, and your ministry to the Lord's church. And so that's the intent, and hopefully you'll see some of that. And so I hope you get something out of it. So, any thoughts or questions before we close in prayer?